The Oakwood Gardens condominium always looked like a picture-perfect postcard of suburban life. Tree-lined streets, well-kept lawns, and that kind of peace that makes you think nothing bad could ever happen here. It was in this little paradise that I settled with my son Riley 5 years ago. Looking out the kitchen window, I watch Riley in his wheelchair, drawing with his colorful chalk by the garage entrance. The focus on his 16-year-old face is absolute as he brings his latest character to life, Celestial Shield, a superhero who protects the innocent from high above. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. Cerebral palsy never stopped Riley from dreaming big. His hands sometimes tremble, but his lines are sure when it comes to his drawings. Ever since I lost my husband 3 years ago, it's just been the two of us against the world. The loneliness of being a single mom can be overwhelming at times, but today I have some company. Caleb just arrived in town after spending 2 years in rehab in Japan. "Sarah, this coffee is still amazing," Caleb says in his deep voice, bringing me back to the present moment. His presence fills our little kitchen, not just because of his impressive build, but because of the energy he carries. Few would recognize in this quiet man seated at my table the same steel-jawed Anderson who dominated MMA octagons for almost a decade. "It's so good to have you back, Caleb." Riley can't stop talking about the lessons you promised him. Caleb smiles, glancing at Riley by the window. "That kid has more determination than many fighters I've known." A black SUV silently glides down the street and stops in front of our house. 2 men get out, one bald with mirrored aviator sunglasses and another, built larger with a clipboard. Both of them wear identical polo shirts with a logo I can't identify from where I am. "Those aren't members of the condominium staff," I murmur, feeling a twinge of apprehension. Caleb moves to stand by me, looking out the window. "Do you know all the employees?" "Yes, our association only has 3 people, and none of them drives a car like that." The bald man gestures energetically toward Riley, pointing at the chalk art by the entrance. Even from a distance, I can see the confused look on my son's face. The bigger man starts snapping pictures with his cell phone, shaking his head in disapproval. "What is going on here?" asks Caleb, already heading for the door. I hurry after him, my heart racing as we step into the backyard. The bald man's words reach us. "This is a clear violation of Section 8.3 of the Aesthetic Regulation." Chalk drawings by the entrance. "That lowers the value of all the properties on the block." Riley shakes his head, trying to explain, but Mr. Wilson always said I can draw here. Mr. Wilson isn't in charge anymore. I'm Gregory Draper, the new association inspector. And this is going to cost you a $500 fine. I open my mouth to protest when the unthinkable happens. Frustrated by Riley's resistance, Draper kicks the wheel of Riley's chair, making him lose balance. "Hey! What do you think you're doing?" I shout, running toward my son. I don't see Caleb move. One moment he's behind me, the next he's between Riley and Draper, his calm stance contrasting with the palpable tension in the air. "You just assaulted a teenager in a wheelchair," Caleb declares, his voice strangely calm. "I think you should leave now." The bigger man, the one the bald guy calls Niles, takes a step forward. "Listen, buddy, we're the authorities here." "You better." The move is so fast I barely register it. Caleb dodges Niles' attempt at intimidation with a fluidity that seems to contradict his size. A single precise, almost casual blow hits Niles on the chin, and he crumples onto the sidewalk like a puppet with its strings cut. Draper is paralyzed for a second, then reaches for something in his coat. Caleb simply steps forward, grabs his arm, and applies a lock that makes Draper drop to his knees with a muffled cry. "Sarah, call the police," Caleb says without taking his eyes off Draper. "Riley, are you okay?" All around us, I see neighboring houses' doors start opening. Mrs. Martinez from number 34 is already on her phone, filming everything. Mr. Johnson crosses the lawn with his golden retriever barking furiously. In seconds, a small crowd of neighbors has gathered, some are calling emergency services while others record with their phones. "What's going on here?" asks Emma, my 70-year-old neighbor who always brings Riley cookies. "These men were intimidating Riley and even kicked his chair," I explain, my voice shaking with anger and adrenaline. Sirens sound before any of us can say more. 2 police cars and an ambulance pull in front of the house, lending an air of unreality to the scene. Officer Peterson, whom I know from community meetings, is the first to approach. "Mrs. Davis? What happened here?" he asks while his colleagues cautiously move toward Caleb, who is still holding Draper down. "These men showed up claiming to be from the Homeowners Association," I quickly explain. "They threatened my son and kicked his wheelchair. Caleb stepped in when one of them tried to assault him." Peterson nods at Caleb, who releases Draper and steps back. The paramedics are already attending to Niles, who is beginning to regain consciousness. "Wait, Caleb Anderson?" The MMA champ, one of the younger officers asks, his face lighting up with recognition. "Man, I watched your fight against Dominguez 3 times. Caleb just nods, uncomfortable with the attention. Peterson inspects the documents that Draper presents, making a few phone calls. After a few minutes, he returns with a serious expression. "Mrs. Davis, these men are not inspectors from the Oakwood Gardens Association. The documents are forged. We've had reports of similar incidents in 3 other condominiums this past month." The paramedics confirm that Riley is fine, just frightened. As the police handcuff Draper and Niles, Peterson continues, "We're going to need statements from everyone. And these videos," he points to the neighbors with cell phones, "will be crucial evidence." The sun had barely risen when the doorbell rang the next morning. I opened the door to find Emma holding her tablet, her eyes wide. "Sarah, you're all over the place," she exclaimed as she stepped in without waiting for an invitation. Riley was still having his breakfast, looking at us with curiosity. Emma set the tablet on the table. On its screen, the video of yesterday's confrontation played with the headline, "Ex-MMA World Champion Defends Disabled Teen Against Extortion Imposters." "It's almost 2 million views," Emma commented. "And all the local news channels are talking about it." My telephone wouldn't stop ringing that day. Reporters, neighbors, even the president of the Real Homeowners Association called to apologize for what happened. Around noon, Detective Ramirez arrived to inform us that Gregory Draper and Robert Niles had been identified as part of a scheme operating in several districts, focusing especially on the elderly and vulnerable families. "They have criminal records for fraud and intimidation," she explained. "Thanks to the video and the witnesses, we have a solid case this time. Many victims have already come forward after recognizing them on TV." The paramedics confirm that Riley is fine, only shaken. As the police cuff Draper and Niles, Peterson continues, "We're going to need everyone's statements. And these videos," he points to the neighbors with cell phones, "will be crucial evidence." The sun had barely risen when the doorbell rang the next morning. I opened the door to find Emma holding her tablet, her eyes wide. "Sarah, you're all over the place," she exclaimed as she stepped in without waiting for an invitation. Riley was still having breakfast, looking at us with curiosity. Emma set the tablet on the table. The screen showed the video of yesterday's confrontation with the headline, "Ex-MMA Champion Defends Disabled Teen Against Extortion Schemes." "It's almost 2 million views," Emma commented. "And all local news channels are talking about it." My phone wouldn't stop ringing that day. Reporters, neighbors, even the president of the Real Homeowners Association called to apologize for what happened. Around noon, Detective Ramirez arrived to inform us that Gregory Draper and Robert Niles had been identified as part of a scheme operating in several districts, with a focus on the elderly and vulnerable families. "They have criminal records for fraud and intimidation," she explained. "Thanks to the video and the witnesses, we have a solid case this time. Many victims have already come forward after recognizing them on TV." Later that day, while Riley's still in shock, the police arrested the imposters and everyone around was left processing it all. The next morning, barely out of bed, I found myself answering the door to discover Emma with her tablet in hand, eyes wide. "Sarah, you're everywhere," she exclaimed as she stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Riley was still sitting at the table, curious as ever. Emma set the tablet on the table. The screen played a video of yesterday's showdown with the headline, "Ex-MMA champion defends disabled teen against extortion imposters." "It's almost 2 million views," Emma said. "And all the local news is talking about it. My phone didn't stop ringing that day." Reporters, neighbors, even the president of the Real Homeowners Association called to apologize for what happened. Around noon, Detective Ramirez showed up to let us know that Gregory Draper and Robert Niles had been identified as part of a broader scam that had been operating in several districts, mostly targeting the elderly and vulnerable families. "They have criminal records for fraud and intimidation," she explained. "Thanks to the video and the witnesses, we have a strong case now. Many victims have already reached out after seeing them on TV." As the paramedics confirmed that Riley was okay, just a bit frightened, and the police handcuffed Draper and Niles, Officer Peterson continued, "We'll need statements from everyone. And those videos," he said while pointing at the neighbors with their cell phones, "will be key evidence." The following morning, it was barely dawn when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Emma holding her tablet, her eyes wide. "Sarah, you're all over the news," she exclaimed as she came in without waiting for an invitation. Riley was still having his breakfast, watching us with curiosity. Emma placed the tablet on the table. On the screen, the video of yesterday's confrontation played with the headline, "Ex-MMA champ defends disabled teen against extortion imposters." "There are almost 2 million views," Emma noted. "And all the local channels are covering it. My phone wouldn't stop ringing that day." Reporters, neighbors, even the actual president of the Homeowners Association called to apologize for what happened. Around noon, Detective Ramirez arrived to explain that Gregory Draper and Robert Niles had been identified as part of a scheme that had been operating in several districts, focusing especially on the elderly and vulnerable families. "They have criminal records for fraud and intimidation," she said. "Thanks to the video and the witnesses, we now have a solid case. Many victims have already come forward after recognizing them on TV." The paramedics confirmed that Riley was okay, just a bit shaken. As the police handcuffed Draper and Niles, Officer Peterson continued, "We'll need statements from everyone. And these videos," he pointed at the neighbors with their cell phones, "will be important evidence." 3 weeks have passed since the incident at our entrance, but the repercussion continues to spread like ripples in a lake after a stone is thrown. What started as a viral video turned into a federal investigation that revealed a much larger scheme than anyone could have imagined. Sitting in the waiting room of the district prosecutor's office, I tried to calm my nerves while Riley flipped through his folder of drawings next to me. Caleb, who had become a constant presence in our lives since the incident, stared out the window with that quiet concentration of his. "Mrs. Davis? You can come in now." The prosecutor's assistant led us down a hallway to a conference room where Jenny Williams, the lead prosecutor on the case, was waiting with a stack of folders. "Thank you for coming," she said, gesturing for us to sit down. "I wanted to personally update you on the case before the official announcement to the press." Jenny opened one of the folders, revealing photos of Draper and Niles, along with 6 other men I'd never seen before. What began with those 2 imposters led us to uncover an extortion operation that reached 7 different counties over the last 2 years. They weren't just issuing fake fines. In some cases, they even confiscated valuable items as evidence of violations, intimidated elderly people into making bank transfers, and even forced some immigrant families to leave their homes under threat of deportation. Riley, who I'd hoped was lost in his drawings, looked up. "How many people did they hurt?" The prosecutor hesitated, clearly choosing her words carefully. "We've identified 63 victims so far, Riley. Many of them are elderly or people scared to speak up. But thanks to what happened to you, and what your friend did," she nodded toward Caleb, "many of these people finally found the courage to talk." "What's going to happen now?" I asked, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. Draper and Niles made a deal to testify against the leaders of the operation, Anthony Mercer, a former city building inspector, and Vincent Kelly, a real estate lawyer. They provided the legitimacy and contacts that made the scam work. Caleb spoke for the first time since we entered the room. And what about the real homeowners associations? How did they not notice what was happening? That's the central issue of the investigation now, Jenny replied, closing the folder. In many of these condominiums, residents barely interact with the actual administrators. Most only get to know the rules when they receive a violation notice. It's a system built on fear and conformity, perfect for exploitation. On the way home, we stopped for a coffee. Riley was unusually pensive, scribbling in his notebook while Caleb and I whispered about the meeting. I never thought drawing on the sidewalk could trigger something so huge, Riley said at last, turning his notebook to show us a new drawing, celestial shield hovering over a city, protecting citizens from shady figures with clipboards and fake ID badges. Sometimes the most important changes start in the most unexpected places, Caleb commented, admiring the drawing. My phone rang, it was Emma again. Sarah, you need to turn on the TV right now. The mayor is talking about you. I asked the waiter to change the channel on the small television in the corner of the cafe. Mayor Daniels was at a press conference, surrounded by city council members. That's why I'm proposing a complete overhaul of the Homeowners Association regulations for our city. The Transparency Project will require all associations to clearly identify their authorized staff, set up an online portal for residents to verify the authenticity of notifications, and establish an independent ombudsman to oversee operations. The camera panned out to show a banner behind the mayor, Riley Davis Community Protection Act. The cafe customers, now paying attention to the TV, began to applaud as they recognized Riley. An elderly lady approached our table. "You're the kid from the video, aren't you?" she asked, tears in her eyes. My sister in Riverside Heights lost nearly all her savings to men like those. Thank you for being brave. Riley, usually shy around strangers, smiled. It wasn't me. It was Caleb who was brave. Caleb shook his head. Courage is continuing to draw when someone tries to stop you. I just did what any decent person would do. In the following weeks, other cities started adopting measures similar to those proposed by Mayor Daniels. The case became a national talking point on community vulnerability and predatory practices. I received invitations to do interviews and participate in panels on disability rights and community safety, which I initially turned down, trying to protect Riley from too much exposure. However, it was my own son who convinced me to reconsider. "Mom," he said one night while I was helping him get ready for bed, "if we don't tell our story, how are other people supposed to know they can stand up for themselves too?" A week later, we were on a national morning show, side by side with civil rights experts and community leaders. To my surprise, Riley spoke clearly and confidently about how the incident showed him that his art had power beyond just paper. When I first drew Celestial Shield, he was just a superhero who flew through the sky helping people. Now I realize that real heroes are everywhere. They're the people who speak up when something's wrong. The response to our case brought to light similar stories from across the country. Some legitimate homeowners associations, fearing they'd be mistaken for imposters, began implementing voluntary reforms. Disability and senior rights groups created safety checklists to help residents spot potential scams. And then, just when I thought the story was finally calming down, I received a phone call that would change the course of our lives once again. "Mrs. Davis? This is Patrick Levine from the Oakwood Gardens Arts and Inclusion Committee." I held the phone, confused. I didn't even know such a committee existed in our condominium. "Actually, we're a new group," Patrick explained, as if reading my mind. "We formed the committee after the incident with your son. We'd like to invite you to a small ceremony at the community pavilion this Saturday." "What kind of ceremony?" I asked, suspicious that it might be another attempt at media exposure. "It's a surprise, but I promise it will be something special for Riley. And of course, we'd like Mr. Anderson to be there as well." I reluctantly agreed, only feeling more at ease when Patrick mentioned it would be an exclusive event, only for condo residents. After hanging up, I found Riley in the living room watching a drawing tutorial video with Caleb, who had been coming 3 times a week for special adapted training sessions he developed just for my son. "Riley," I called, "it looks like we have an appointment at the community pavilion this weekend." When we arrived at the pavilion that Saturday, I hardly recognized the place. The space, normally austere and functional, was decorated with colorful banners and art panels created by neighborhood kids. More surprising, though, was the sheer number of people there. Practically every resident of the condominium was present, including many I didn't even know by name despite years of living here. Patrick, a middle-aged man who taught art at the local school, greeted us at the entrance. "Welcome. Can you wait here for just a moment? We're just putting the final touches on the preparations." While we waited, I noticed something curious. Several people were wearing t-shirts featuring a stylized silhouette of Celestial Shield, Riley's character, soaring over what looked like the outline of our condominium. "Riley," I whispered, "I think your hero's got fans." Before he could answer, Patrick came back and led us inside. The pavilion burst into applause as we entered, making Riley blush intensely. In the center of the hall, covered by a cloth, was something large and rectangular. The president of the Real Homeowners Association, Mr. Wilson, took the microphone. 3 months ago, our community was victimized by imposters who used fear and intimidation to take advantage of residents. But what they didn't expect to find was courage, the courage of a young artist who refused to be intimidated, and the courage of a neighbor who stood up when it was needed. Emma took the microphone as she stepped on stage. "When I moved here 15 years ago, I barely knew my neighbors. We lived side by side, yet apart. It took that incident for us to realize that community isn't defined by rules or appearances, but by how we watch out for each other." Patrick and 2 teenagers stood next to the covered structure. "Riley, your drawing and your story inspired us. That's why we made this." They pulled the cloth away to reveal a spectacular mural, an artistic depiction of the confrontation at our entrance, reimagined as a comic book scene. There, Riley in his wheelchair was drawing on the pavement, while an almost superhuman version of Caleb, with unmistakable traits of Celestial Shield, protected him against shadowy figures. Above the scene, in stylized letters, it read, "True power protects, it doesn't oppress." Riley was speechless, his eyes running over every detail of the mural, recognizing his own art style in its execution. Caleb, usually reserved, looked equally moved by the tribute. Patrick continued, "This is just the beginning. The Arts and Inclusion Committee is organizing weekly art workshops for neighborhood kids, and we'd really love for you to be a part of them, Riley, not just as a student, but eventually as an instructor." Mrs. Kim, the local pharmacy owner, approached with an envelope. "On behalf of the neighborhood shop owners, we'd like to offer you something special." She handed the envelope to Riley, who opened it carefully. "It's a full scholarship to the Adaptive Martial Arts program at the Riverside Community Center?" Riley read, disbelief in his voice. "For 2 full years," confirmed Mrs. Kim. "Including accessible transportation for all classes." Mr. Wilson took the microphone once more. "And there's one more thing. We've drafted new community guidelines that encourage artistic expression in public spaces. From now on, the free sidewalk art event will be a monthly celebration where everyone, especially our kids, can decorate designated spaces with chalk. Our first theme will be a Heroes Among Us." As Riley received the crowd's congratulations, Emma pulled me aside quietly. "Look at what's happening, Sarah. Don't you see? We used to be just houses next to each other, not a community." It was true. All around the hall, neighbors who once only waved politely from their windows were now chatting animatedly, making plans, sharing stories. A group of teenagers in wheelchairs, which I didn't even know lived in the area, had gathered in a corner, eagerly checking out prints of Riley's drawings that had been made into small posters. Riley Davis called one of them, a boy around 14 years old. "We're the Wheel Squad. We're forming an art collective and we want to know if you'd be up for designing our logo." I watched as Riley was surrounded by the group, his face lighting up with a confidence he rarely showed in social situations. Caleb appeared next to me, a small smile on his usually stoic face. "Never underestimate the impact one person can have," he said softly. "Especially when that person has the tenacity of your son." The event turned into an impromptu celebration, with families bringing food, local musicians volunteering to play, and a sense of togetherness that was completely new to Oakwood Gardens. The t-shirts featuring Celestial Shield, which I later found out had been produced by a group of parents, were being sold to raise funds for neighborhood accessibility programs. At the end of the night, as I helped Riley pack away the gifts and cards he had received, I found him gazing thoughtfully at the mural. "What are you thinking about, sweetie?" I asked, fixing his hair. "I'm thinking that maybe Celestial Shield might need a new story," he replied. "One where he doesn't work alone, but with a whole community of heroes." As autumn settled in at Oakwood Gardens, the transformation of our condominium was evident not only in the mural and the new initiatives, but in the very texture of everyday life. Gardens that used to be meticulously uniform now showed personality, a few sculptures here, wildflower beds there, and even a community garden where residents swapped planting tips and fresh vegetables. The rigid white fences that separated the properties now seemed less important when people regularly walked through each other's yards on impromptu visits. On one particularly pleasant Saturday morning, I walked into the kitchen to find Riley already awake, working intently on his digital tablet, a gift from the Wheel Squad after he designed the logo that now adorned his custom jackets. "Someone's feeling inspired today," I remarked as I made breakfast. Riley smiled without taking his eyes off the screen. "I'm working on the final episode of the miniseries. The editor wants it ready by Monday." That miniseries Riley mentioned was a 5-part digital comic called Neighborhood Guardians that had started as a personal project but quickly caught the attention of a small online publisher dedicated to emerging artists. The series, though fictional, was clearly inspired by the events in our community, featuring a protagonist in a wheelchair who discovered that his drawings had the power to bring guardians to life to protect vulnerable people. "Can I see it?" I asked, placing a cup of hot chocolate beside him. Riley turned the tablet around, showing me a double-page spread where the protagonist and a diverse group of characters faced off against a dark entity that looked like it were made of regulations and fines. The art was on another level. Compared to his drawings from a few months back, the online classes with a professional artist Emma had organized were really paying off. "It's amazing, sweetheart. I can't believe how much you've evolved," I said. "It's because I'm drawing all the time now," he answered simply. "At school, in martial arts class, at community workshops. It's like something has unlocked inside me." Mentioning martial arts made me smile. Twice a week, I'd take Riley to the Riverside Community Center for the adaptive program. Far from just physical exercise, the classes combined philosophy, meditation, and self-defense techniques specially designed for people with limited mobility. Caleb often showed up as a guest instructor, much to everyone's delight. Then the doorbell rang, and Riley immediately saved his work. "That must be Miguel." Miguel Ramirez, 15, was the youngest member of the Wheel Squad and the son of the detective who had investigated our case. Diagnosed with muscular dystrophy, he had become one of Riley's closest friends since his family moved to Oakwood Gardens the previous month, a part of the growing trend of families with members with disabilities choosing our condominium because of its new reputation for inclusivity. I opened the door to find not only Miguel, but also Emma, Patrick, and 3 other teenagers from the Wheel Squad, all sporting jackets with the logo designed by Riley. "Good morning, Sarah," Emma exclaimed. "We came to pick up our resident artist. The festival is about to start." The Free Sidewalk Festival had evolved from a simple chalk drawing event into a monthly celebration that filled the central park of the condominium. What started as a local initiative now attracted visitors from neighboring areas and even professional artists who came to conduct free workshops. The city officials were so impressed with the community impact that they were considering replicating our model in other districts. Soon we were in the park, where colorful tents and temporary panels had been set up. A small stage was hosting a local band made up mostly of teenagers, including a wheelchair-using lead singer whose powerful voice filled the space with classic rock covers. Stalls sold t-shirts, stickers, and art prints, part of the proceeds going to a local accessibility fund. Mr. Wilson, almost unrecognizable in casual clothes compared to the formal suit he always wore at association meetings, was handing out colorful chalk and mapping out areas on the asphalt for participants. When he saw us, he came over with a warm smile. "Riley, we've been expecting you. We saved the central section just for the Wheel Squad, as planned." While Riley and his friends headed toward the designated area, Mr. Wilson lowered his voice. "Sarah, did you see the notice from the city this morning?" "I haven't had a chance," I replied, intrigued by his tone. The City Council just unanimously approved the Oakwood model for all homeowners associations in the city. Standardized regulations, mandatory official ID for inspectors, transparent communication channels, everything we put in place after the incident. It took me a moment to process the news. So that whole nightmare really led to systemic change? Wilson nodded solemnly. More than that. I've been invited to speak at the National Conference of Condominium Administrators next month. They want us to share our community transformation experience. I looked around the park, watching how the space that once felt nearly empty now pulsed with life and creativity. Families who barely knew each other were talking animatedly, children of all ages and abilities were collaborating on elaborate chalk drawings, and even the most reserved residents had come out to participate or simply watch. Later, while the festival was in full swing, a group of reporters arrived, not to cover our specific case, but to document the community transformation as part of a series on successful urban initiatives. I felt tense at first, worried they might focus too much on Riley and the incident, but they seemed genuinely interested in our collaborative model. "How did you turn a crisis into an opportunity to reinvent your community?" one reporter asked Patrick, who was coordinating the arts committee. Patrick paused before replying, "I think the incident just exposed something we always instinctively knew, that purposeless rules and fear of standing out kept us isolated. When we saw someone vulnerable getting attacked for daring to express creativity, something awakened in us. We realized that a true community needs to protect individual expression, not suppress it." While the reporter interviewed other residents, I noticed Caleb arriving quietly. As always, his presence caused a small stir, partly because of his former fame, but mostly because of the reverence he had earned in our community. He moved directly to where Riley and his friends were working, kneeling, despite some difficulty because of his rebuilt knee, to examine the art. "Y'all are creating something extraordinary here," I heard him say, his deep voice full of genuine admiration. One of the most popular t-shirts circulating at the festival featured a phrase that had become something of an unofficial community motto: "True power protects, it doesn't oppress." People of all ages wore them, and versions of the phrase began appearing on urban murals and t-shirts throughout the city, often accompanied by a stylized version of Riley's celestial shield. At the end of the day, exhausted but satisfied, we headed home. Riley was unusually quiet, deep in thought. "What are you thinking about?" I asked as I helped him get into bed. "I'm thinking that maybe I want to be a real artist when I grow up," he replied. "Not just someone who draws comics, but someone who creates art that makes people think and act." "You already are that artist, Riley," I said, kissing his forehead. "You're already making a very real impact." A full year had passed since the day 2 imposters stopped in front of our house. A complete cycle of the seasons, each bringing new evolutions to our community and our personal lives. On one particularly bright spring morning, I found myself once again watching Riley from the kitchen window, a habit I never quite gave up, despite all the positive changes. He was near the garage entrance, the same spot where it all began, but this time he wasn't alone. 5 neighborhood kids, including 2 with visible disabilities, had gathered around him as he led what looked like an impromptu drawing class. "He's got a real knack for teaching," Caleb commented, having become such a regular presence in our home that sometimes it was easy to forget he didn't actually live here. "He's patient and knows how to break down complex ideas in simple ways." I nodded, watching as Riley demonstrated a shading technique, his hand moving confidently across the paper while the children watched intently. He found his purpose through all of this. Sometimes I wonder if I should thank those criminals. Caleb smiled, a rare event on his usually stoic face. "Thank the resilience of Riley and the community you built together. The bad people only created an opportunity, it was the good people who turned it into something meaningful." That afternoon, we had an important appointment, the official opening of the Oakwood Adaptive Arts and Training Center, a project that had started as a distant dream from conversations between Caleb and Riley during our living room training sessions. The center had taken over the old maintenance shed of the condominium, completely renovated thanks to a combination of crowdfunding, corporate donations, and a municipal grant for accessibility programs.